So now you have the whole panel, a wealth of knowledge in front of you. Any questions?
Hiya. So this might have been answered earlier, but why can't we put one of these at the end of one of Tom's networks to stop? I know you mentioned kind of putting a 5G mast up, but more for mobile use. But if you had something like that in a black spot that people can connect to from a central point like their router, rather than having to run fibre all the way, is that an option, or is it too expensive?
I missed the beginning of the question.
So, sorry, what I'm saying is you've mentioned part of your network, it's too difficult to get fibre, or it's too costly to run a fibre. But can you not do something like this to fill your black spots, which isn't quite as, saying we use Starlink, but you have something here, so you basically rely on 5G for the end of your network, so that your customers are connecting their routers to a 5G, and then their individual devices are all coming off that. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we're in the position where a lot of the network that we're deploying, there is no mobile signal. So we've actually bought satellite phones for just general connectivity for engineers working out in the field, right? Because they can't call home. Unless, of course, they build the broadband and then they connect through the broadband they've just provisioned to make a wireless call back to the office. But yeah, no, we've been trying for a little while to find a route, a partnership, a financing model, a coverage model to then adopt a 5G technology alongside the fibre. I mean, we're trying to push the fibre as far as possible because that's what we believe in, right? But then the community also needs mobile connectivity. It's just another thing that the community needs. We haven't got there yet. We haven't got a partnership. We haven't got a route. But yeah, why not? I mean, we've got all this fibre out there and buildings to put small cell antennas on. We've got the community on board, and let's say that involves a church, it involves community buildings and village halls, things like that. They're primed for putting equipment on with the right permissions and licenses, of course. But that's an opportunity, I think, because then the 5G equipment can get a really raw fibre backhaul, all you can eat. And then if there's a private network on it, because problems with the MNOs and roaming and all the rest of it, it's just a non-starter right now. That could be part of the solution. Another thing before I stop talking is a problem that we've got is when it's hay season, all the tractors are out, and so you've got one person back at the farm, if you like, and you've got all the tractors are out and they're in the fields and they're collecting. They rely on CB radios most of the time to communicate because they haven't got the mobile connectivity. So we need to be solving that problem as well, because if there's an emergency out in the field, I don't know, a tractor broken down or something like that, really you should be able to get your phone out and right problem, but at the moment they've got their own little localised networks to communicate, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote in my notes before this that there's many technical hammers to crack many different technical nuts, but I think it's a combination of the technologies, which is why I said I felt a little bit like the cuckoo in the nest earlier when I came in here, but actually I think aligning the two technologies so they bridge and segue very nicely is exactly the right answer. But, from a perspective of us, could we do something like that? Absolutely. We're at scale up to 35. I don't want to build a knock and a sock and all those bits and pieces, right? But you can make these things come together to give yourself something really good.
Yeah, I think we touched on it. The technology isn't the problem. The problem is regulation and the stranglehold of individual companies on individual bits of spectrum, all welded to a telephone.
Is it regulation?
Solve that bit. Actually, technology works as described.
Is it regulation? Do you think it's also a business model as well?
Yeah.
I think it's just we haven't yet, as an industry, come up with an effective business model to let these two things work together in a sort of repeatable and scalable way.
I think lots of the business model is actually held back. It is a chicken and egg.
Yeah.
If you can relax the regulation, then a business model will come to the fore. It's 5G, by the way. Even now, it's not cheap. If you buy it from a tier 1 vendor, an Ericsson or a Nokia, it's unbelievably expensive. If you build it with software and these cheaper, smaller pop-up style networks, it's affordable. But wow, just go back to the question: there can be no 5G without fibre. So you have to start with fibre. some Starlink or Kuiper that you can now backhaul with LEO, but again you're constrained. So the first prize is terrestrial fibre. That's what we should always go for, and then to extend off that, sure, these 5G or 6G, and it actually doesn't need to be energy, just wireless. We can extend wirelessly, but there is a problem. Lots of people mesh and repeating. You can't. It's like trying to feed 5,000 people with 3 loaves. It just you need a miracle. It can't be done. Basically, you can't. There's only so much spectrum you can use, and you can only get so many bits per hertz in that spectrum, and a fibre will just cane anything that you can put up in the air. So fibre is the first prize, but you can extend wirelessly. Again, in communities, they're very willing to share, and you put up a mast on my farm, I'll shoot to your barn and go to the church. This is all doable.
The root cause of it is the government's monetised spectrum, and the people who bought it are rightfully protecting it. However, that doesn't promote the aims of this conference, which is rural connectivity.
I think there are some positive changes with Ofcom's moves to make using the shared access spectrum easy to use. But that's all rolling through at the moment. It's not fully done yet. To get an outdoor medium power license in a 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz spectrum, it's about 40 days. Okay, that's quite some time when you're trying to plan and go live. And it's not always guaranteed. You don't get what you always want. It is improving though. They did some great tooling recently where you can now zoom in on a map where you want to go and you see how much bandwidth in that 400 megahertz is available. That makes it a lot easier to try and plan where you want to be. So there's definitely improvements coming to help.
And again, Ofcom, there is this amazing, in Europe we have 400 megahertz of clear spectrum from 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz. It's one of the biggest contiguous blocks for shared spectrum access globally. But 4 gigahertz is great if you want it inside it's not going to help you in a rural setting. It'll only go so far. And again, lots of Ofcom and the way that people look at these networks is all very influenced by the MNOs, these big public networks, which are all about giving downlink and trying to cover the pictures that Mark was showing that there are no black spots or not spots, but they're all done on downlink. So the problem that you have is that you're constrained in your uplink. So there's no point in getting a high power 4 gigahertz license because you're only as good as your uplink to that network. So what would be really good is Ofcom could make some other spectrum available, or kind of enforce where some of these MNOs have got prime spectrum, UHF spectrum, band 28 or lower frequencies, which are fallow. They're just not being used. Now, if you can start putting these radios, lower frequency radios, on the end of fibre in communities, and actually have neutral hosts change the rules, as we've been kind of saying, to allow these new business models to actually fly, then there won't be communities left behind.
Yeah, I missed this because I didn't arrive at the beginning of the day. There hasn't been an awful lot of discussion about the use of fixed wireless access for bridging the bit beyond the end of the last mile, as a company I've been associated with for the past 20 years has been doing. In particular, recent developments in the radio equipment field, particularly in the 60 gig region, are providing the ideal solution for the other side of the road type solutions, where you've got multi-100 megabit capability. You can run ranges of not just tens of meters or hundreds of meters, but you can go out several kilometers if you wish to, and provide that sort of off-the-edge type of access. Now, I may have missed something at the beginning today, but it seems to me there's a trick missing here somehow, in that fibre is a great medium. Here's some rather outrageous statements made about its capability and its durability today, but I'll pass those by. But off the edge of fibre, using the access to the farmhouse on the hill, using a radio circuit, and my colleague and I have 20 years of experience doing that, range isn't really the issue. Whether you want to go 5, 10, 15 kilometres or so, you can do it all with radios which have been around for a long time at a much, much lower price than I get the impression of being bandied about. So the question I ask is, did I miss this point being made earlier on, or has it not been made?
I think to extend, you're quite right. Any frequency, I'm not sure if 60 gigs I could push 10 kilometres, but
Show it being done.
but using 60 gigs, you have a toolbox. Some UHF spectrum, some mid-band spectrum, and some high-band spectrum. You do need the fibre. The terrestrial fibre must be there. You can use satellite, of course, and these will be patches, but it must be glass first, and then extend with appropriate radio. And again, these radios, 5G radios, are expensive, so you don't have to use 5G. You can go off-piste, homemade 5G or XG.
I have actually been looking at using fixed wireless access on the end of fibre. It has been disappointing, even just sort of looking at it, because when you start to really look at it, to get the line of sight that you need, it doesn't end up being that much easier and that much cheaper than just putting fibre in. You don't agree?
No, not at all.
Maybe we've been looking at it wrong, but certainly when we came to look at it, to try and get that kind of ubiquitous, there was always, a certain percentage that were in shadow. You just couldn't economically get that line of sight, get that connectivity to them. It wasn't as thorough as we were suggesting. Adrian?
No, I was just agreeing.
You got full agreement there.
I've got a quick question. Sorry, good afternoon. My name is Tom Keane from Corney. We have been monitoring a potential technological game changer within the market. It's called direct to satellite. There seem to be a number of companies now operating in this space, AST Space Mobile, and it appears that Starlink are about to get in on the action. The interesting thing is you don't need any external VSAT antenna, box, nothing. You should be able to connect directly from your phone to a satellite. Now, obviously, being in the fibre business, we're pretty worried about that, and I notice everything here today has been about the last mile, but is this a credible solution? Can you see it working? The satellites are all being launched. The AST Space Mobile Bluebirds are up there. These have got massive antennas up in space, and they're making some pretty bold promises. Just be curious as to your opinion and your thoughts.
They haven't got the capacity. They haven't got the capacity. That's the problem. I mean, that's the difference between cellular to fibre. When you've got an OLT, it's serving a group of houses, maybe 64 on an 8-PON OLT. That's it. On a satellite, a low orbit satellite, it's about I think it's 20 kilometres circle off Starlink at the moment.
So this morning we said there's about 2 properties in there.
Well, if you're in North Carolina, maybe, but satellite. I mean, the next generation is going to have more capacity, but there's a fundamental laws of physics issue with satellites that you're never going to get over, really. This man, I know about his system. He has actually he does what I call dumbbell, where you go around outside, and it's I think it's quite a good idea for just attacking the people outside the village that are 5 kilometres away, and that's probably quite a viable way of doing it. But satellite, low orbit satellite, really is not. It's a very premium service as well.
I think it's text and maybe upload. You'd be lucky to upload a picture, but the idea you're going to deliver Netflix or you're going to high bandwidth on in mid-band spectrum and from an iPhone that's connected to an LEO is it's text. It's not going to be broadband.
I think we might all be at risk from being guilty of what I was referring to earlier when I talked about it being cuckoo and nest, right? We all think our own technology is the only one. Yeah, I think it's about bringing an ecosystem play into this sort of the equation, right? So in certain situations, LEO's great. In certain situations, use us. Yeah. It really depends upon hitting as much of the connectivity that you need via an array of different technologies. I think that will solve the problem.
Yeah, bear in mind this question, I know very little about fibre, and all I know I've picked up from SCTE lectures. Anyway, several people have said today that you put fibre in the ground, it's there for 50 years at least. Is it really? Doesn't it degrade like anything else? We've had plastic cables deteriorate, fall to bits. Doesn't this happen with fibre? Do you get water in the cables? All that sort of thing.
The glass itself is pretty impervious. You might get degradation of the cable around it, but glass is kind of like there to stay. It doesn't mean it won't necessarily have mechanical problems.
I do a lot of work in the United States. They have a lot of problems with people shooting wires with shotguns. They're actually shooting a bird sitting on the power cable, and they get shot.
The same happens in some of the big shooting areas in UK as well.
So they are right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they also have rats that are partial to a little one.
Yeah, so
it's mechanical problems.
It is mechanical problems. The glass
if you
itself.
If you have it up on telegraph poles, even just the wind blowing out a little bit of flex, you are putting it under mechanical stress and strain. It can get gnawed on and all the rest of it. But I think if you have an inert, it is an inert tube of glass that's buried underground. As long as the badgers and the rats don't get to it, then it's go on, please disagree.
Well, I don't disagree intrinsically, I disagree practically. Fortunately, my colleague Ben Orr isn't here because he could help me out with this and that. But in the 90s, albeit about 30 years ago, I was responsible for installing a very large amount of fibre and hybrid fibre networks, which now are largely belong to Virgin Media. Nearly all of that fibre has been withdrawn from service and replaced. Nearly all of it. For one reason or another. Not necessarily mechanical degradation, but because of changes in specification and in changes in needed capability. Now, it's very easy to say that you fit the fibre and forget about it, because it's a nice thing to say. I said it to my boss at the time. I said, it's a great model, so we'll never have to mess about it again. Your return on your investment will be assured way out into the future. I thought it was true. Experience tells me that it wasn't actually the case, that the materials became unsuitable for advances in specification and technical requirements, which we could not reasonably have foreseen at the time. Now, it's like to me, it's a bit risky to make a prediction which goes out beyond, say, 15 or 20 years in terms of capability. A piece of technology, however passive it may be, will survive into the future indefinitely. That's the real point here, is that I think it must be too carried away with the glory of this fabulous technology, because optical fibre is not intrinsically a new subject at all. The principle was demonstrated during the Victorian era, and fibre has been used in this country for transmission purposes for at least 60 years. So none of this is great new stuff. Yeah? I just think we ought to be a little bit cautious about overselling it.
No, I agree with that. I think it would be risky to have a business model that relied on it lasting 100 years. Of course it would. I think the point about changing the spec and all the rest of it, I think the tipping point there is once you have fibre being ubiquitous, being the volume of fibre in the ground. If in the 90s, if you changed the spec and so the current fibre didn't work with the new technology, it's less of an issue. If you were to change technology now that meant that the whole fibre network, as it were, became obsolescent, then actually I think you wouldn't sell your new technology, and so you get to a point
I take what entirely. I just think we have to be cautious about overselling things beyond their capability.
Absolutely.
Yes, that's the point.
But I think it's almost an unknown how long the fibre lasts in the ground at this point. But we can
Better than 50 years.
No.
Well, I think there's something for you to research. I think is the 1x6K network that's now Zayo that runs throughout the United Kingdom. I was going to ask what type of fibre needed to be replaced. Do you know what the spec was?
No, I don't. This is too long ago for me to remember. All I remember at the time is we took the best advice from the suppliers we had on the type of fibre we should purchase for the next we were building, which were hybrid voice and data networks, running at advanced multi-megabit data rates. And we took the advice we were given, we bought the fibre that we were specified to do, and it wasn't cheap.
Understood. So this network that I'm talking about is the one that we use for our backhaul. And so there's a portion that's G652 and there's a portion that's G655. And that is the fibre that you can really change the ends on and push the boundaries on. We're running 400 gigabit on it now. But I think that's the one to watch because that's been installed for a long time now. It's a 96 that was run, I think, alongside some major utilities at the time. So I can't remember the date that it was installed, but it's certainly been in tens of years, not 30 or 40 years maybe, something like that. was installed a while, but yeah, we've been able to adopt 400 gig on the top of that, and 400 gig wasn't a thing back when that fibre was installed. You know, the integrity, we're running G657A1 on our network, so all the non-bend intensive stuff and all the rest of it, so we can just put it wherever we like. You know, I think that's one to watch. I think it, you know, it's maybe not 100 years, but it's certainly more than 10 or 20 or 30 years, I think.
I think we can't necessarily rely on the whole network being in there 50 years without being changed. One thing I would be reasonably confident to say is that some of the network will be there in well over 50 years.
Don't doubt it. Don't doubt it.
But the same is true of the sort of, you know, the Victorian water and sewage infrastructure. So still not sure what that says about anything, to be honest.
I've been frantically sending some WhatsApp messages to former colleagues on this very subject, and to my current colleagues at Nesta Cables. They don't have any official data. However, my colleagues from Colt Telecom that stand or used to stand for the City of London Telecommunications are still running fibre services over the first ring that they put into London in 1996. So that might give you a little bit of confidence for those that put it in last year. It might not be the 50 years the gentleman's looking for, but it's certainly more than 25 years. So you've got a little while yet, gents, before you need to start worrying dramatically.
I've got a stupid question. And I have to caveat it with, I didn't hear every single lecture today. One of the things I was hoping to hear about, didn't hear about, was DSL switch off. Is that not a topic?
Yeah, it should be here this morning.
Okay.
It's a factor that we need to consider. It's going to happen. It's going to affect demand. It's going to affect the change over to fibre. We're not quite sure exactly what the commercial model is going to be in terms of how that's done. We'll see.
Some of it we do, though, don't we? Because exchange-based copper is going. So a lot, we talked about somebody, I can't remember who it was mentioned this morning, something like 20% of people are still on ADSL2. That's going. So that's quite a chunk. So it's then really what's happening with the final bit about fibre to the cabinet, when that's going to be going. That's the only piece of DSL is going to be left quite shortly, I think.
I think that's the interesting thing. Well, to me, it's kind of an interesting issue. We kind of know when it's going to be switched off within reasonable parameters. Yeah. No one seems to have a plan what's going to happen.
And I do find it strange that quite a lot of forums you go to, whether it's Inca, whether it's here, whether it's where, there isn't a lot of discussion about it either. And yet it's an enormous opportunity. I mean, 10% of the population have never bought broadband before. They're now going to have to for the first time ever.
So there's actually, you have a very good point, and it's actually, it's not really spoken about, but you can see utility companies who are working, you know, SCADA or PLC systems up the top of hills, or hydro-skip power systems, water plants. They've actually, they knew, they were told by BT, and I think it's been extended, the cut-off day is going to, it should have been doomsday or cut-off, lights out, should have happened already, and it was extended. So what they've done is they've kind of quite rightfully, lots of it's just telemetry, right? So they've just put in 2G modem, but the 2G modems, the GSM routers that they've fitted in, and again, security for them is probably they've put in kit, but then it's about to get switched off too. The 2G is going to get switched off, so there is a gaping, there is a hole. And the 4G networks just don't have the coverage that the 2G, so again, a different spectrum. So there is definitely an elephant in the room with all of these remote hilltops.
But for all of the altnets here, that's creating a huge amount of churn in the market where people, whether they're
people who've only ever bought voice services before, like their Baker-like telephone, they're now going to have to work out how to get that onto a VoIP service. You know, some of these old nets, they have 10 or 15% take-up. If you manage to secure that, you've just doubled your take-up. If you then add the other 20% that are on ADSL2, you just quadrupled your take-up.
And if you don't, somebody else is going to come in and overbuild you and decimate your take-up.
Yeah.
Other than that, there's no
So
problem.
I live in the west coast of Scotland. I went to Ardtornish for Hogmanay, and I hadn't been on the Morven Point for a while. And there've been lots of interventions, Broadband, Delivery UK, BT, get fibre. Every house that I drove past for an hour and a half till I got to Ardtornish all had Starlink. So this idea, Starlink, and now that is a service which actually really, it conveniently drops off in UK POPs, but it's kind of a network that's out of our control. But it's actually it's kind of affordable. It's £80 a month, it's comparable to buying, but if we don't do something, somebody else will overlay a network, and it's not ideal.
If I could just add a little, since I've got a lot of opinions. Low Earth orbit, I think we need to be very cautious of, because we saw this maybe 20 years ago when ADSL was first being rolled out. Satellite was seen by policymakers as the easy option. And it actually delayed the deployment of other broadband services for quite a long time. So I think we need to be quite careful working with things like with central government and the like on making sure they actually understand the limitations, where it fits into the mix, and don't let them assume, like it appears America's about to do, that Starlink will be the panacea for rural areas.
I'm just going to come on one point earlier, if that's all right, Adrian, on yours, or take up on exchange-only lines and telephone lines. I think you can't really stack your percentages, because what the experience we've got is going into a community, you have a mix of all of them. So the majority of the ones we're converting onto fibre are exchange-only lines, VDSL lines. And through some of those, there will be just ones with a telephone number. So with an engagement with the community, we can then educate them to say, right, these things are turning off, so you're going to have to buy broadband from us. Don't cancel your phone line just yet. We'll port it into our system. You can keep your telephone line that you've had for, 50 years. The telephone number, sorry, that you've had for 50 years. And then you can turn everything else off and go for it. So I think when our experience of going into communities, there's a mix of all of them. And we're just trying to soak them all up. And then, so when that does happen and everything is switched off, that community has already been transferred.
What I was trying to get at was not so much your sort of model where I understand exactly what you're doing. I think it was more when you look at some of the old nets that are hovering around the 10-15%. They haven't spoken to any of those. They're focusing on the people who want the gigabit. Right. They're not focusing on the people who...
Yeah, I guess our approach is very different, because we're all inclusive, right?
Completely.
Can we give them a microphone, please?
Too late.
Too late. I think, I mean, there are sort of multiple points in it. One, there's the sort of the regulation and funding and whatever. We've got to 97% for super fast broadband, and then suddenly there's that, we've made a mistake with this, we need to do full fibre. Let's pause on the 97%, 97% is sufficient, let's put full fibre in. That 3% that didn't have super fast have bugger all now. And so we're still chasing that same last 3%, so that's sort of one issue. But the other issues, as we said before, some of this, the early churn that we're into at the moment is demand-led by the consumer. We're very soon getting to the point where it's going to be churn by the service provider. And that is the bit that will work out who gets consolidated and who gets scrappy.
But that's where I think we need to be quite careful. Is that, so, for example, we know that ADSL2 is about to be turned off. That's nearly all of it is TalkTalk and Sky. So they will naturally migrate that onto their VDSL services if you're not careful. So it is something that alternative providers need to be very conscious of, because otherwise they will just roll over onto their existing providers.
Yeah.
make a valid point there. That's something we need to watch out for. That the competition element of copper switch off hasn't been thought through. We discussed it at lunchtime. In that the people who take a telephone line only are going to be phoned up by the incumbent. And it happens, it's not just in the UK, everywhere. You're going to be phoned up by the incumbent saying, you need to take my broadband product to continue with the service you have today. That, if you are a competitor to that service, isn't fair. But that's the way it's going to be, unless we do something about it. And we need to be mindful of that, because it is 10 to 15, some communities 20% of the available market is locked to the incumbent, and there is no mechanism to unlock it, and it's running on their timetable and their messaging. And the op-eds will have nothing, they won't even see it. And so 20% of market share, we're allowing the regulator to give to the incumbent. Is that a good idea?
Well, instead of giving it to the incumbent, because what we don't know this time is whether the incumbent's going to take it.
We all assume BT are going to build everywhere. That's not a good.
I mean, it's a really interesting topic, isn't it? Because they're saying that POTS, plain old telephone service, is going to be switched off by January 2027. And we already said that it was supposed to be in 2025, now it's 2027. Does the general public know about it? Well, actually, if you go and ask my mom, absolutely has no idea. So where is that level of communication happening? And are we lobbying government to say, like we did with digital switch off, when we went from analog TV to digital TV, what are we doing about that to make the general public aware that this is going to happen in the near future, to encourage more competition in the market, rather than the likes of BT going to say, right, just switch over to us. So what are we doing in this forum to ensure that that level of lobbying is happening? The second thing is, if it is January 2027, actually, realistically, are we going to be fully gigabit ready?
Well, an interesting point is I'm already starting to receive those telephone calls. So from the telephone number for my office, which is actually a voice over IP number, I'm having calls saying, oh, you've got a copper number, you're going to have to do something about it, would you like to come onto our open reach reseller network? So those calls are starting to happen.
Just woken up, sorry. I've just been thinking about two different things. First off is POTS. I personally at home, my POTS has gone. My telephone comes off the internet. The big problem with that, of course, is that in an emergency, if the power's off, I can't make any calls.
I've been involved in that for some time, since I was at BT, so 25 years. Okay, what kind of emergency might you get in your home? You might have a home intruder, you might have a fire, you might have all sorts of things. Personally, I'm not going to, let me get to my copper line and make a 999 call. I'm going to pick up my mobile and I'm going to deal with whatever threat there is, in whatever way is most appropriate, but either way it's not going to be standing still. So I think this 999 threat about the copper switch off is overplayed.
I think
maybe not completely.
I don't know.
Sorry, James.
I mean, if I pick up a phone and dial 999, I don't need to say anything. The police know.
Yeah, including
not
your
with
mobile
my
phone.
not with my mobile.
Oh, yeah, no.
They don't with my mobile.
I mean, the threat's overplayed as long as you're not the one not dying.
Yeah, it's a backup that, you know, I think it's, I mean, BT have been trying to switch mine off for 2 years and I just ignored them. Probably mainly to annoy them because I'm getting them back for all the years of having 5 to 8 megabit VDSL. But they've still given me my POTS line, I've still got my POTS line.
Again, I think something that's quite interesting is BT, again, in very remote Western Isles of Scotland, their exchanges, when we our subsea cables or power outage, we will go for 3 or 4 days with no power. the BT exchange is still running on its generator. So if the fibre service comes out of that exchange, it will be up. So what you need at home is actually just the GPON, or the little unit, well, it depends how you're connected, but you just need a very small battery. It will run you for 2 or 3 days and keep your connectivity up. And then your deck, you can charge your deck phone and or your Wi-Fi or whatever.
The point I was going to make is that battery backup in the home is the thing to concentrate on, because as a respected telecommunications provider, your core end should have batteries in backup and should just stay on. Let's just assume that, right? So then you go to the house. What can you do? And I think we've got a solution that does 3 hours, so you can plug an inline battery, if you like, that has the right connector that goes into the ONT on the wall and powers up your telephone line so you can make a call. So that's there. I think the government want longer. You mentioned days, but that's a different level of expenditure and technology that needs to be in the house to be able to do that. It's really difficult.
I think a little fibre ONT you can run with a relatively, people in the west coast of Scotland, Tiree, Barra, they go without power for 2 or 3 days regularly. So they already have in place systems to keep their Wi-Fi network up.
Yeah, I used to live in Northumberland in a small village, and there it was considered reckless if you did not have at least 2, preferably 3 sources of power. So you'd have your logs for burning, you'd have electricity, and you'd have bottled gas, because there's no mains gas.
Is it with regards to battery backup, or?
But hang
Dave,
on,
can we just take the battery backup first?
All you need to do is get long enough to put your generator on.
Thank you, Simon Wade. There was an expression earlier about public awareness of PSTN switch off, etc. Some of you are not going to like what I'm about to say. Amongst the altnet community, there's very much a head in the sand about the legislation that's there by Ofcom at the moment. I was talking to a founder of an altnet whose name shall remain unknown. No? See me after. When I asked what are you doing about providing a battery backup solution for vulnerables, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll wait until we've had the first death. Hopefully it won't be on my network. Okay, so
very Matthew Hare.
We're going to come see you after.
But there's certainly an amount of naivety amongst the altnets about provisioning for vulnerables.
Can I come back in? The reason I introduced that was thinking about your 2027 deadline, and I'm not sure we've actually properly worked this out. Yes, obviously we can battery back up, and how long you battery back up for is a question. In the intruder alarm industry it would be 8 hours, wouldn't it? In the nurse call system it would probably be 12 hours, and so it goes on. So none of those limits are set yet, are they? The other thing I thought it worthwhile just thinking about for a moment was StarNet and using satellites. And Tony and I, in fact, the 4 of us had quite a heavy session last year in Amsterdam talking about this.
Thanks for adding that, Dave. They were talking about Starlink.
Best not to go anymore.
Please be very specific.
Yeah. What happens in Amsterdam stays in Amsterdam, I reckon.
Well, actually, during the day, but never mind. Oh dear. I always okay, so Starlink, as we understand it at the moment, has some 700 satellites whizzing around up there. We also understand that they're in a mesh, an electronic mesh, communicating with each other. If you think about the UK, it has a number of uplink positions in the UK, okay, which go up and join that mesh. That's your first limit in terms of bandwidth, is getting up, because when it goes up, it'll only go to one satellite, and then that meshes and shares the data with the others. Okay. As you increase the load or attempt to increase the bandwidth, you're going to need more satellites, more meshes, more uplinks. So I think your limitations are there as you grow your network, not in any other direction. So at the moment it's probably fine. You could probably put more base stations in, you have more uplinks, and it would probably be okay. But all the time you've got a limit on those, then you've got these bandwidth limitations. Okay.
I think in France, in rural France, they've come unstuck with Starlink, where it's they've too many people have gone for in too small a geography, and they are all contended that they're fighting for bandwidth with one another. And in Glastonbury, we have examples in the UK of where lots of Starlinks come together in one location, and it just goes to mush. So there's no quads, there's no. But I hope there are other LEO constellations that can overcome this, but they are not the silver bullet. Again, terrestrial and extend. Use it. It's great stuff, by the way. Very cheap, and you can pop it up. But it's definitely not for a critical service. It's not sovereign. We have no. So I'd be worried if I saw water companies or utilities using such services, because they can be brought down very quickly. So it's good and bad.
My initial point was going to be about the pots. I'll come back to that in a second. I think the more we talk about this, the more points I'm coming up with here. But about Starlink specifically, you've got an issue now where oversubscription is a huge problem for Starlink, where this has been sold as the panacea. This is the silver bullet for the not spots. The reality is it sells out quickly, they run out of capacity quickly, and it's a 2-year launch program to deliver more capacity in these areas. So you've got issues like the southeast of England now, which is, remarkably well off compared to other parts of the UK, which now has a stop sell order on Starlink because there's just too many people using it. And ironically, there's people using it who have access to full fibre. It's a bizarre situation, but a lot of this is down to lack of communication from existing operators about what services are available in those areas, or sometimes it's something as simple as a construction problem, where you just can't get a physical cable to a customer. The house is ready for service. It can sometimes access more than one fibre provider, but there's other problems in the way. So Starlink is great today in certain areas, and it's not so great in others, and this is kind of part of the problem. Coming back to the POTS issue though, and it's been touched on by the gentleman already about this risk that's associated with turning off the POTS network. And this is something that has been seen by the two incumbents already in OpenReach and Virgin Media. And Virgin Media is taking quite an aggressive approach to turning off its legacy POTS network. Obviously it has its own PSTN, which is completely separate to OpenReach. It did hive out the management and the maintenance of that some years ago to OpenReach, but they have switches on their own sites. It's a completely separate physical network to OpenReach. And they started the migration to digital voice some years ago. Now in some areas, they've turned off POTS completely, to the point where the physical switches have been removed. So there's good old DMS 100s and all the old legacy Nortel kit. The rooms are empty. It's amazing to see. But the headaches that were encountered in these franchise areas were enormous, absolutely enormous. And a lot of it is down to communication. So the issues are not with, I would say, my age range, or my age range and below. So I'll not say what age I am, but I'm below 50. So for my generation downwards, it's not a problem because most of my generation have access to mobile services, they use internet services at home. There's a good chance they don't even have a phone line, so it's less of a concern. The problem is the elderly generation who maybe only have a phone at home, they don't have internet, and the communication becomes a real problem because the service providers are sending emails, they might send a letter to say, oh, we're changing your phone service. And that whole migration from a standard copper line to a digital service is very difficult. So for Virgin Media, they do offer a phone-only service without internet, but you still need a hub fitted in home, of course. It's a whole new installation, and it's a lot of disruption, and it's a lot of cost for the operator as well. For customers who have broadband services already, elderly customers who have broadband, probably TV and phone services as well, the problem that VM had was that migration process from the fixed copper line to the digital service. They basically posted out an adapter and said, plug it into the back of your hub, plug your phone into this adapter, and your phone service is going to migrate on this day, and everything will be perfect. And it did. The problem was the customer's phone was on the other side of the house, and their hub was in the living room. And the elderly customers were left with a phone service that they didn't even know had switched, and they go to pick their phone up and there's no dial-tone. So there were issues, there were considerable issues, and there was a death, which was linked directly to that situation. So now VM's in a position where they've had to halt that shutdown, and we've now got this disproportionate phone network around the UK. And then when you look at the altnet situation, you now start to understand why some of them are not interested in phone. It's problematic. The regulations that come behind it are just a nightmare. And the final point is the battery backup piece as well. We talk about battery backup at home a lot for digital voice services, and the reason why it was such a disaster to start with was service providers provided battery backup for the hub or the ONT, but when the customer lost power, their phone was dead. So brilliant, your ONT had power and you had internet in the house, and you maybe even had Wi-Fi, but your fixed phone line's dead, even though the actual power behind the line was still on. So there is that technical issue there. The bigger issue that hasn't been explored is the battery backup in the network. So you can have as much battery backup you want in the house. If you don't have adequate battery backup at your ONT or your network location, then it doesn't matter how much battery backup you've got in the house. And that's a whole other story. There's a lot of
I
issues.
think Tom did address that. As respectable operators, you will have battery backup.
But we do, but is it capable?
I also say that from what you're saying, it sounds like I'm in danger of becoming the older generation. Which possibly explains why I'm getting those phone calls, and you can imagine the fun I have with operators who tell me what I do and don't have in my home.
So I completely agree with everything you've just said. I think the one thing I think we need to be careful of is altnets may be afraid of voice. They're still captured by the regulation. The regulation doesn't say battery backup for voice providers, it's everybody. So the altnets are covered by it already, and they have been since 2018. The other thing I was going to add, one of the reasons the exchange closure and copper switch off is happening slowly is because of altnets. They've been moving into telephone exchanges, and that's actually delayed the closure of the exchanges. So the altnets have actually delayed this.
I'm not sure whether you're saying that's a good thing or a bad thing.
It's a thing. I think one of the things that's been quite interesting is that there's been one of the things, with the PIA, instead of putting cabinets outside telephone exchanges, they've been moving inside the exchanges. And at some point they're going to have to move outside because those exchanges will be closed. So there's going to be a lot of disruption to the altnets that comes with the whole voice switch off because they're going to have to suddenly rebuild half their network.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, there's a lot that's interesting there. I'm keen to see what's going to happen to all of those exchanges because we're going to see the need for data centres, more and more data centres, further and further out in the network. Where would be a good place to put those, I wonder? Yeah, interesting.
Well, at the moment, BT determines because they'll be the open-reach handover exchanges, not the ones the altnets are.
I'm sorry, I just have to disagree. I don't believe that the altnets are holding up the exchange switch off.
It's one of the reasons.
So the racks that they're occupying for sure would preclude the building being closed, but it doesn't stop Openreach going in and taking out all of the switch, copper switch stuff.
Two different points.
Yeah.
So we're into some game of the last man standing now.
Yeah, it sounds like it, doesn't it? Any more? Is that really it for today?
I'll throw one more sort of contract.
There's always one.
This goes back to a point, thank you, this comes back to a point that was made earlier. I believe it was. I think he's left actually.
It was probably Tom.
It was Tom.
It was,
yes,
yeah.
It was. I think he said something along the lines of, could we see the death of the ISP, or is it?
That was mine.
Was that yours? There, right.
Quoting Barry Ford.
This is a really interesting topic, because 2 years ago, I think that probably would have been the case. I think ISPs were probably a dying breed, and what you'd see in the UK was this mergers and acquisitions steamroller that we've seen over the years with the cable industry as well. The reality today is very different. I think that the mergers and acquisitions piece now will be for the physical networks, not for the ISP. And the reason I say that is what we've just seen with City Fibre. They've purchased lit fibre, and then they've not known what to do with them. So City Fibre are not a consumer-facing operation. They've bought an ISP, which is a full-service ISP, network build and consumer, and then realised that they can't manage the consumer, or they have no interest in managing that consumer. So they've then farmed that out. Lit Fibre now has re-emerged from the flames and exists today as an ISP. The question really is to the altnets in here, do you see more of a future of a mergers and acquisitions point where your network becomes the asset that is sold, but you live on, you phoenix back as a brand? And guys like Ogie, for example, are a perfect example of that. If anybody was to buy them, or merge, or however the business deal would be put through, it would be madness to wipe them out and just swallow them up into whatever the bigger brand was. The power behind that localised brand is what makes them so successful. What we've seen in the past, I'll go back to the Virgin Media example, the last acquisition that was made for Virgin Media was a small outfit called Small World, and that was a disaster, an absolute unmitigated disaster, because the brand was so toxic beforehand that even though it was rebranded, the local aspect of what that cable company was didn't go away. So it was very difficult to sell into these areas. And I just feel that mentality of mergers and acquisitions, buy, rebadge everything, right, we're all company A now, that doesn't work in this climate anymore. And this idea of having multiple netcos that manage your physical operations, and then having endless choice of ISPs that can wholesale across that, I think that's more the world we're moving across. And it would be really interesting to hear what the altnets have to say about that.
We're going to have my opinion first, because I've got mine. Interesting bits from an evil consultant perspective. I'd love to have seen the due diligence report on lit fibre. I mean, how the heck did they get away with that? In terms of Ogie, Wildernet, you're right, they have that local presence, they have that local strength as an ISP. But I think both Ben and Helen would argue that they have that Trustpilot score and that local presence because of the full vertical stack. If you take part of that away, then what you've got is the sort of the Ogie ISP or the Wildernet ISP trying to go head to head with Sky, and the branding and the marketing spend of Sky, and that without the control of the quality of customer service and infrastructure that they have with a vertical stack. So I think if you take away that vertical stack, I'm not sure that I don't see those ISPs surviving in even the mid-term if you take away that full control. Anybody left who would disagree with that? Anybody left from the office?
I think when I was at a big UK session, Deloitte kind of done a presentation on what they saw across Spain and France, and you didn't really see. You saw the consolidation, but it was big players. So you ended up with 3 or 4 big incumbents that kind of took over everything. So unless we get it completely different here, I see it going the same way.
That one is where we're going to, I think, be very different from the 1990s model of consolidation. Because you're right, I think, there will be some big player consolidation and big player buying up of networks. But they will look at a lot of these smaller networks and say, too much pop. Don't need that to make a market share. So there's that effort compared to market share. So I think we're going to get a few big players with substantial networks, and then we're going to get a long tail of small operators who can be very efficient, very cost efficient, very good Trustpilot scores. Some of them not even that necessarily, because they're the only ones there, so what the heck. But they'll be there for the long term. Being awkwardly in the middle is going to be awkward.
I tend to agree. I think one of the things that's interesting in this space is that if you take Sky and Virgin out of the picture, because they are different, all the other ISPs, pejoratively, are adding an IP address and transit. There's not a great deal of value in that.
But Barry Ford would argue you don't need that value because you can go and get it.
And that's my kind of point. I think that Sky, Virgin, they have the content, there's a much broader play.
Everything else is Amazon Prime.
Yeah, and after that, you're just an IP address and transit, in which case you might as well get it from a local trusted brand as anywhere else.
Barry might have been right all that time.
Well, of course, assuming that that exists in the current situation, but if you look at perhaps some of the things Octopus Group are doing, they're selling broadband and energy transformation and. So to imagine it all stand still where you only sell broadband is probably not the future. And so look forward another 5 years, we might have more energy people in this room than we have broadband people. Because the energy revolution is the really next big thing. When actually, you're not going to have a battery on your broadband, you're going to have a battery on your entire house. So I think we're in a little transitory period, coming back to that battery backup thing, it's a transitory period we're in now.
There will be no energy revolution, I predict, without comms. All of these smart octopuses, whatever if this room's filled with energy folks in a couple of years' time, they'll be off the back of comms guys. The comms rules all of this. So yeah, I think
no comms, no battery, no charging car, no front door, no television, stay in bed.
I think we can end on that, can't we? That was quite a statement. I don't know where you go from that one, do you?